and I think you have to tell it it's okay.
It's
So
okay.
hi Keith. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me and talk with me about this. Would you start by introducing yourself and telling us who you are, where you serve, and what your spiritual path has been thus far?
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, Keith Goheen. I was ordained and fellowshipped back in 1999. So this is year 25 for my um, ordained ministry, of course, preparation and all that before that. Um, I am the lead chaplain at a community hospital. Well, actually, we're growing into a community healthcare system in southern Delaware and have been here 18 years. I'm also a board certified chaplain, so I have the clinical credentials that one should have to do the uh, kind of work that we do in a healthcare setting. Um, I actually, it was my wife who introduced me to Unitarian Universalism. Um, I did much of my growing up in South Central Pennsylvania, and probably when I look at it most closely, my Christian roots are Brethren.
Mhm.
We have relatives who are Amish, and that broader um, German pietism, um, which is what I grew up in, and which is I'm very much a contemplative in my spirituality, and I also regard myself as a mystic, both of which are found in significant quantities, I guess you could say, within my brethren roots. Um, as a young adult, um, as with many, um, was not involved in religious community. I actually got deeply involved in competitive fencing for many years,
Interesting.
and that was sort of my community as in college and then as young adult afterwards. And part of that practice included something of a dive into Buddhism, and I found that to be very rich, especially in the contemplative side of me, and that part of the practice um, was enriching. Uh, but I never was completely at home there.
Mhm.
And many years later, and in New England, my wife suggested that we go to a local Unitarian Universalist congregation. We went there. We fell in love with the people immediately. Um, and it was there that I found my call to ministry. Um, it was a historically Unitarian and Universalist merged church. I'm aware that early on, um, the the Universalist part of our history resonated with me at a very deep level. In fact, it kind of surprised me. It startled me, and I think it was that was part of the fulmination that ultimately led to my um, coming into ministry and my call. From there, you know, college ordination, all that stuff. I originally came here to Delaware to organize the local congregation, and then once they were ready to uh, call and settle a full-time minister, I stepped back, and they are doing fabulously. And I get to be a wise elder that shows up for major events, and I'm very proud of them. I'm really excited for them. But chaplaincy also has been a remarkable path, um, one that I would certainly not have chosen for myself. But there's, of course, very strong emphasis here on the pastoral side of ministry. But also, there's been room for me to work on some other projects that have been um, challenging and interesting and rewarding. So here I am.
Could you talk just a little bit more about, you said that you connected with the Universalist roots. What was it specifically, and how did that happen, and how did that impact your practice and your being?
Hmm. Um, Probably this is going to be a slightly roundabout answer, but probably my first theologian prior to or following the minister who was serving that congregation, John Agnew, at that time, was James Luther Adams. And I read all of Adams' work. I really loved that. And there was Adams, although he comes out of the Unitarian side, clearly had that universalist spirit. And um, that led me to begin reading some of the other people out of our history. And when I finally got around to Hosea Ballou, it was um, I felt like I was reading one of my own ancestors.
Mm.
That his story, um, his enthusiasm, um, his grasp of um, of the gospel message, just sort of illuminated for me or articulated for me something that I had felt, I guess, all my life. Um, there is a universalist element that runs through the brethren, and I'm pretty sure that my grandfather, if he'd known, my maternal grandfather, if he had known there was such a thing, would have been universalist, just in the way he approached the world and the people around him, and his desire and hope for acceptance and place for everyone. And so I'm reading Blue and I'm hearing my grandfather, and it's like, wow, there's something substantive here. There's something that that speaks to me that I didn't know um, was out there, a voice that I had longed for, but had never heard. And that that's probably the vocational voice that I'm still following.
So, what does it look like to be a practicing Universalist, brethren-based Christian as a Unitarian Universalist? Like, what practices or and a mystic too?
Yeah. Um, I would say certainly um, one of the things that has sustained me, because we don't have a particularly well-developed mystical, at least not since the Transcendentalists. There was another group that I found um, connection with and expression that was very, very helpful for me. So it's not there strongly, but it's still represented. And um, being here and being and feeling as part of that, to borrow the name from the hymnal, that living tradition. Um, Even when I'm most typically in a place where the things that I find most deeply spiritual and resonating don't happen a whole lot, um, knowing that it's there under the surface. And certainly the values uh, that that all of Unitarian Universalism is gathered around um, are uh, are expressions of my faith as I understand it. So I definitely connect on the values side of things. Um, and that's been important because that was one of the things that has, shall we say, held me separate from my roots, is that um, they are decidedly more socially conservative um, than I am, and they don't get me. And that's okay. You love them anyway. Um, so there is um, a freedom of thought and of feeling, and I think probably the feeling side of that that I can live with and draw from as a Unitarian Universalist that I wouldn't find in my native community. Does that get at your question?
Yeah. Well, it sort of gets at my next question, which was going to be, how does it harmonize and support? Um, I guess with this question, I was hoping to get more of, um, you know, do you have a prayer practice? How do you draw on your Christian faith and your Universalist faith and your Unitarian Universalist faith and the work that you do as a chaplain? Like, what are basically, how do you live your faith and how do your beliefs impact? Sorry, big question.
It is, but it's a big practice. Um, on a personal level, the contemplative is really my basic practice. Um, I need time in the quiet. And so I need regularly to have space where I'm not, how do I say this? I'm not thinking, I'm not doing rational kind of stuff, uh, but but that I turn inward to to feel what's going on with the spirit, to listen for the spirit, to look for, I guess, what our Quaker neighbors might call that inward light. Um, and staying in touch with that while being present in the world is the larger practice. So I have to do both. There's a part of me that would just love to go off in the woods and live a quiet, monkish kind of life. Uh, but that's not where I feel called. I need to be in the world. Um, and to borrow from the language of my home community, to be a light in the world. Um, and that includes being a light within Unitarian Universalism, one of the sources, one of the voices um, that we need to hear and recognize in one another, which I think ultimately is really the work of religious community, and lifting that up and practicing it in the world, which is essentially what I do as a chaplain. Every time I walk into a room, every time meet a new patient or a family member, um, in some ways, I kind of have to be reordained, by them. Um, I need their blessing to really do the work that we do so well. And so it's learning how to be present to them and to understand what their needs are in the moment, not just emotional or social, whatever needs they might have, but where is their spirit? Where is it moving in this? Where is it not moving? What's blocking? What hurts? What helps? Where's the hope? Learning how to listen for those things at the same time that I'm listening to um, my own inward spirit to see where it's resonating or where it's aching, and I'm going like, oh, okay, so here's a connection. I feel this, and then finding a way to name that. And it's been my experience that more times than not, the spiritual healing that happens is when we can name that spot where we're resonating with one another. And something happens, and they're like, you know, they're moved and suddenly I'm moved. And well, in the language of my people, the spirit has moved between us. And that's deeply gratifying. And it's energizing. Uh, but the work getting there can be exhausting. So, um, how's that? Is that getting closer to what you're looking for?
That was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
So, are there ways that Unitarian Universalism has rubbed against your path, been uncomfortable? Have there been spots of friction um, or struggle?
Yes, there are. We are a tradition of, some of the old folks used to say come outers. People come out of other traditions, and there are no lack of people in our communities who have been wounded in Christian communities. Um, and I am oftentimes a recipient of their woundedness
Hmm.
because they know what they don't believe or what they don't want. And I identify as a Christian, and suddenly I'm the other, and they're back in a very hurt place. So I have to find this balance of how out can I be, uh, and where are the places where I can be safer with this, and where are the places where I need to be tender of the people around me. There are some historical struggles on that. Oh, I think most of those, at least it's been my experience, that a lot of that has um, is fading with the generations. Um, but the early Unitarian and Universalist struggles about control of the association, um, for folks who really identified, particularly with the humanist Unitarian side, um, there was a kind of dominionism that, and in fact, I was in a meeting one time and a colleague said that they had driven the Universalists out, quote unquote. Um, and I had to kind of like raise my hand and say, well, there's at least one still here. Um, so those are painful places for me. Sorry about the noise from the printer. That'll go away here in just a second.
It's not even
Um,
reading through Zoom.
okay. But those are painful places for me. And um, early on, I guess I probably accessed a little bit too much Hosea Ballou. You know, Ballou was a great argumenter on behalf of universalism, and I was kind of caught up on that. And it probably didn't help that many of the early congregations that nurtured me into ministry were historically universalist and remembered those hurts. And I kind of got caught up on that myself. So part of my learning has been that I'm coming out of a place of being hurt, and they're coming out of um, a narrow, painful place too, and how to be more pastoral in that with them and with me, and to recognize when that's sort of being triggered for me. Um, so that sometimes being in the places where you get rubbed um, helps you grow. I'm trying to remember Carl Jung's quote is that um, it'll come back to me at some point. But some other wise person also said that you need friction to smooth the sharp edges off of the stone. So even there, um, I have been polished. Same thing happens in the hospital. You meet people who are struggling for any number of reasons, and sometimes you're just the person that they need to get that out with. Okay, that's how the healing comes. Sometimes it hurts, but that's what we do.
I It feels really important to me to acknowledge and feed our roots, our theological roots, our Christian roots, our Universalist roots, and our Unitarian roots. Um, and I think uh, it feels dangerous to me somehow to cut ourselves off from that. And I'm a raised UU, so uh, as a which means that sometimes I struggle a little bit with the come outer culture, right? Um, I,
Yep.
I understand, I try to meet those hurt places pastorally, of course. I mean, that's my job. Um, but I can get frustrated if people aren't willing to work on the healing, move through the healing. I get frustrated when people get stuck there. Um,
Mhm.
do, do you have any wisdom or experiences that would inform how to, I mean, what you're describing, those moments of connection and healing are so beautiful. Do you have any tips?
But how to invoke that?
Yes.
Um, Two things come to mind. One is being able to acknowledge that and to say, that this feels like this is a painful place for you because it feels painful to me. And to be able to sit with them in that pain. Um, there's a resonance that happens there that opens the possibility for transformation because it's a safe space for the pain to come out and to look at it and then eventually recognize it for what it is. Um, One of my critiques of my evangelical Christian colleagues is that they love to go right to Easter and the resurrection, and they're not real fond of going through the painful struggle of Holy Week. Um, but I think we lose a lot if we can't stay back there in the struggle and not expect them to get better, but to let the healing come in its own way in its own time. And the other piece in that is that nothing can happen until they're ready for it to happen. I can't drag them into wholeness. I, I would love to do that, um, but um, the best I can do is, to hold open the possibility and try not to let myself get shut down uh, by what they're doing and not to try to move them quickly because I can't stay where they are. And if it really is an unsafe space, then I need to figure out how to get out of there and maybe someone else can help them. But if I can be safe in there, what an interesting and paradoxical way to companion someone. And we do a lot of that work in the hospital.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share or talk about or
Well, I am, I love theology. I could talk theology for hours. um, um, I think I would like to loop back a little bit on your comment about the dangers of losing our roots, because I do think that is a real danger. Um, when we forget that our universalist ancestors um, were absolutely convinced of the overwhelming power of God's goodness, and that took the form of love. And so now here we are with this big conversation about putting love at the center, like this is some new and crazy thing that we've come up with. When in fact, when you go back and look at photographs of the old Universalist revivals, there's this big banner above the preacher. It said, God is love.
yeah.
So, so we come back to that. We come back to that in a different way with a broader understanding from many more perspectives than we held back then. Um, but um, it is the gospel. It is the good news. And I think if we know how to link back to our ancestors, we're reminded of uh, sermon I just gave this last week. We're reminded of the seeds that we have been entrusted with to carry forwards. And those are seeds of love. And how do you care for each other? And how do you make sure that everybody is taken care of? Because that's the universalist side of things. Everybody gets there. How do we get everybody there?
I
Uh,
like to say, love everybody, no exceptions.
yep. Doesn't necessarily mean that you like them,
Nope.
but you do love them. and and you realize that, God's love is ultimately the greatest love, and God loves everybody. So if I can't quite get there, it's all right. I'll love as many of them as I can, as best I can. But I have to recognize my capacity, my limits on that too.
For sure.
Uh, but also, when we go back and look at the history and we see where they failed and where they came up short, we can certainly be critical of that. But that for me invites me back on reflection of, okay, well, what am I missing? Uh, and am I perhaps recreating mistakes that they made? Um, how do I break the cycles that they didn't see? That's my spiritual work, and that's what's going to be going into the seeds that I pass forward.
I like to remind my folks too that loving everybody with no exceptions, universalism is not an easy, it's not an easy path.
No,
I think when you can't consign the folks that you disagree with, or even the folks who do evil or sociopathic things, when you can't send them off to hell, when you have to somehow figure out how to have them be part of the beloved community too, it's a real challenge. It's not an easy path.
no, it's not. It is, I find time and time again, a humbling practice because I can't do it alone.
Right.
I cannot do it alone. That's why I need community. And failure is always an option. You know, it's okay if we come up short because we learn and we can build on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So along with love, there's a tremendous amount of grace.
Which invites us into the whole conversation around sin and,
Hmm.
you know, the anyway, but we probably shouldn't go there.
Actually, I think it's an underdeveloped area in Unitarian Universalist theology.
I agree.
Um, we have sort of gotten ourselves so positive that it's hard for us. I'm going to borrow on Carl Jung again here. Jung is another resource for me. We don't see the shadow.
Right.
And sometimes we can be um, pretty rough with each other to make sure that it doesn't show up, that we don't notice it.
I think when we deny the existence of sin, you see people getting defensive. And it's sort of the remnants of the old salvation by character. Um,
Mm,
it's like we can't appear to be anything less than morally superior, when in truth, when we normalize the fact that we're all imperfect, we all make mistakes, um, then when somebody comes to us and says, okay, so here's a place where here's a place of hurt, right? Here's a place where what you're saying or doing hurts me. I don't need to respond defensively in that moment if I can. So for me, one of the key pieces is to and I don't know how I do this mentally or intellectually, but it's like I separate out um, so that piece about I'm inherently worthy, I'm unconditionally loved just as I am, and at the same time I'm sinful and make mistakes and miss the mark. And if I'm holding on firmly enough to this knowing, then it doesn't feel as threatening um, to have somebody point out my flaws and my failings.
yep, I do know. You're right. I'm watching your hands here, and I'm thinking about, there's this good whole side over here. It's kind of like a sun, and then the sin side, is the shadow side. So in order to look at the shadow, you need the light behind you. So you're sort of turning toward it. Um, we can look at our imperfections, our shortcomings, uh, with the light of our goodness, and in that is where we grow.
Exactly.
Uh, that's part of the work that I do as a contemplative insight. Is like, you know, this is Lent, so we pause and um, we let those uncomfortable feelings rise up, find out what they can teach us. And that I think is an exciting spiritual lesson, um, that those things, those sinful places, as it were, can actually teach us something of value. Um, and in doing so, they are resolved and they move us. I don't know if virtue is the right word here, but there's a healing. They
Right.
move us toward wholeness, maybe a better way to say that.
Exactly. Thank you. This has been fun. Um,
Yeah.
any final thoughts or comments that you want to add?
Hmm. No, but well, no, but isn't that, that's like yes, isn't it? I greatly value the work that you're doing, and the inquiry that goes with this. And I hope that in my own universalist heart, and maybe my prayer here, is that it brings us all into deeper community. Um, the
Amen.
I Yeah, the identity we hold and the place from which we work from is not the destination. There is
Beautiful.
more.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.